Yes. Okay, so welcome. My name's Yogi Hendlin, and this is a presentation that you actually can't see up there. Let's see if we go like this. All right, there we go. Yeah. So this is a presentation with Matthew Slayton, who we met through the Pirates, through Terry Deacon's Pirates. And Jeremy Sherman, who was going to be the first presentation, I also know through the same group. So we're going to talk about the musical turn in biosemiotics, an expressivist model of communication. Let's see, there's Matthew Slayton right there. Just so you know that this is a co-authored work. And I'm going to read to you a presentation today, so the slides will just be illustrative. Human music and language are two systems of communication and expression that have increasingly diverged in how they are approached and studied, which is surprising given that music and language almost certainly co-evolved and emerged from the same semiotic field historically. In this talk, we'll explore the different ways in which life sciences, social sciences, and semiotics consider music and language and what the consequences are for the field of biosemiotics. In particular, we want to push back against what we'll call a linguistic bias, which privileges indexical and symbolic forms of meaning over the iconic. It's not surprising that we ended up here, as language is a referential system of communication which allows shorthand extrapolation useful to passing on messages, even if their quality is degraded in the passing as they are increasingly decontextualized. Music, on the other hand, foregrounds iconic, associative, and aesthetic meanings conveyed by an immediacy that's lost through non-virtuosic repetitions. And this is barring the recent invention of the technological reproduction of sound. Music has always been played for specific audiences, with each performance offering an interplay between culturally contextualized expression and audience responsiveness. Both music and language employ symbols and motifs that rely on foundational indexical and iconic forms of meaning. But language is something of a standard bearer for symbolic meaning, as music is for the iconic. Our hope is that by considering the origin forms and many instances of music and language in both the human and more than human world, that we can place symbolic, indexical, and iconic forms of meaning on similar footing in terms of the depth of significance that they can convey. The payoff for this work will be to clarify how expression and interpretation of different kinds of meaning are defined by cultural, semiotic, and ecological contexts, and hopefully remedy some of the language preference we've identified in previous work on the subject. So, we're going to call this a false dichotomy. On the surface, it seems easy to differentiate language and music when it comes to humans. Language is meant to communicate information, music to express emotion or aesthetic aims. And yet we know that both language and music serve both purposes. Synesthetes, or highly trained musicians, for example, grasp far more context in music than the untrained, modern, decultured individual. Similarly, language famously contains far more musicality or wetness when spoken or even in written form than a mathematical digital understanding of interpretation alone, dryness. This is the classical question of co-duality, analog and digital, that Emich and Hofmeyr discuss. Our complaint is that there's a historical trend to privilege language over music, the symbolic over indexical, and the indexical over the iconic, as a superior form of conveyance. This also happens in colonialism, which has led to an overemphasis on the exclusive benefits of language and underemphasis on the significance of musicality in semiotics. And just for a recent example, there's this book in the Perspectives in Pragmatics, Philosophy, and Psychology. Present understandings of language coalesce around convictions that it is hierarchical and modular, starting from phonetics through syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. Thus, it is a convenient model case for talking about more abstract symbolic capacities such as cognition and cognitive behavior. Language helps humans to describe and construct our external and internal worlds into a cohesive whole, such that language is elevated as a kind of axiom of mind and experience. One way of describing this discourse is linguistic bias due to our current dominant anthropic communication style, where the more decontextualized a referent can be, the more flexibility it has without regard to the concomitant loss in communicative fidelity such a deliberately atonal move brings. This split between expression and content erroneously assumes that one element can exist without the other, and that content is superior, and content here meaning a semantic content. In order to rediscover the iconic and aesthetic aspects present in all modes of communication, we analyze acoustic communication in its myriad forms. To put it simply, we call any and all forms of acoustic expression music, in the way that a zoo musicologist would. Martinelli, for example, describes zoo musicology as the study of, quote, the aesthetic use of sound communication among animals. His usage of sound communication may sound like a wiggle word, not wanting to call it language, but not wanting to relegate music as merely expressionist. This is where semiotics comes in. While we see the pragmatism and strategy of such a move addressing this classic open question about whether absolute music, unaccompanied by text or program, represents or expresses extra musical content, this implies an ex ante separation of aesthetic elements and semantic ones. Music has no more ability to pin down a specific interpretation than plain language does. The difference, however, is the important question of how ambiguities in language and discourse are resolved. In ordinary language, one can ask, what do you mean by that? With music, however, we have no such luxury. Instead, we have repetition and variation on themes, call and response, mimicry, and silence. So, in the interest of time, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. So, utterances that contain musical qualities for animals and non-humans, and these musical qualities themselves, we can see aspects of semiosis that would be lost or impoverished if we merely try to interpret them in terms of our sort of concentric circles from our language as the baseline or as the default mode of most precise communication. And we find that in our discussion that we will err on the behavioral, structural, and processual accounts, where expressive and communicative pragmatics are sufficiently universal that we can use, but of course species specific, that we can use instances of musical behavior to describe musical behavior more generally. This move accommodates animal musicality as the null hypothesis to be defended against, rather than an impositional structure to be otherwise accounted for. And it allows recuperation of lost meanings, while of course introducing the danger of over-determining utterances as music, linguistic or meaningful, when they may be mere non-intentional expressions. But this discussion of intentionality already bifurcates semiosis, despite the fact that whether an act is intentional or not, it has an effect in the world. This more expansive and permissive conception of musicality does not discriminate between intentional and non-intentional musicality. If the overall synesthetic effect is deepened or heightened or made more precise by the incorporation of musical elements. This lands us in an expressivist model of communication in which no utterance or modulation of rhythm, frequency, or tone is for naught, even if it's not deliberate. Instead, these parameters are ripe with affective, pictorial, and propulsive immanency, and they are not devoid of proposition or argument. And here we cite Rothenberg, and we could also cite Sternfeld, of course. We can choose to resist the sheer elocutionary force of an utterance, but that doesn't mean that it bears no meaning for the agent or other audiences, intended or unintended. Okay, So let's take a look at a first example, alarm calls. Let's see what my next slide is. Yes. Many species of monkeys, for example, make calls to communicate to conspecifics that there is danger. Other animals may overhear or eavesdrop on these calls to learn information useful to them. Yes, one function of an alarm call is to communicate, but it is an excellent example of how musicality can feature in what appears to be the analog to a linguistic act. So Austin, of course, in the background here. The qualities of an alarm call beyond its reference to danger might include urgency or fear, or even something more basic, like a strong urge or need to make that call. What is it like to be the vocalizer in that environment or to hear that vocalization? There might be qualitative, affective, or even aesthetic experiences where the category of music can help us to clarify perhaps underappreciated aspects of the meaning making going on. Music has contextual aboutness. The idea that music is a language of emotion is one instance of this feature, but only one piece of a larger story. An alarm call is danger to those who hear it, to those intended interpretants. Or it is iconic of that danger in its onomatopoesis. Right, so here's some alarm calls. This is the work of Slobodniczak et al. On prairie dogs and prairie dog dialects. And what happens, this is a spectrogram, for example, of a typical prairie dog alarm call given in response to whether the human being is wearing a yellow, green, or blue t-shirt. So there is differentiation of something that they didn't have in their semiotic conceptualization before, that they're being creative and improvising with. So here's just some onomatopoeia right here. There's an immediate recognition and reaction by others of what the utterer is experiencing. Music is immediate because iconicity is immediate, an immediate aboutness that connects between an organism's experienced environment, its body, and those who hear the acoustic behaviors. The immediateness and aboutness of musical meaning can be seen in humans and non-human primates. In humans and non-human primates, where there's a direct relationship between embodiment and acoustic expression. Powell et al. Demonstrated that human vocalizations contain information about bodily states, such as muscle tension during upper limb movements, that are detectable by listeners who hear the vocalizations but cannot see the source. So participants were able to synchronize their arm movements with those of the speaker when they could not see the speaker's movements. These findings mirror those in non-human primates. For example, rhesus monkeys can differentiate age-related body size based on acoustic qualities of vocalizations. And orangutans exploit this sonic phenomenon to mislead others, cupping their mouths with their hands so that they sound larger and more threatening. It's worth pointing out that alarms take many forms. There are many examples that challenge the idea of what a sensible danger signal can be. Yellow-legged gull embryos, still in eggs, react to adult alarm calls by vibrating within their shell and transmitting the warning to their clutch mates. Moving beyond the animal kingdom, tomato and tobacco plants emit ultrasonic sounds when stressed by lack of water or if their stem is cut. They are detectable by other conspecifics. Rubber trees become more productive when bombarded with certain wavelengths of ultrasonic waves on their tapping surface, where you're going to get the latex from. It is not possible to infer intention on the part of the plants, but both cases are undeniably ways in which plants produce and react to sonic expressions in their environment. A lack of a signal can be informative as well. Gray squirrels, for example, have been observed to act normally when they hear bird chatter and stop and hide when the bird chatter stops. Bird chatter acts as a background sound, or muzak, of the animal kingdom, of which squirrels are always peripherally aware. The sound of a healthy coral reef promotes community development in fish populations, whereas the sound of a damaged coral reef suppresses it. Many species of fish appear to derive meaning from the acoustic environment about the suitability or potential of a particular location for food and shelter. It doesn't require a long conceptual leap to see that musical valence, so valence, whether the animal is perceiving a positive, safe, welcoming situation or a negative, dangerous, threatening situation, is an essential part of the information animals perceive acoustically. Perhaps it is evident from these examples how musical features like iconicity, embodiment, and valence feature in calls that indicate the presence or lack of danger. But why bother calling these behaviors music? Is this just overextending the concept past the point of usability, or is there really something to be gained? As we've argued, musicality helps us to emphasize the depth and effect of iconicity present in all expressions and communication. The general tone or mood, safety or danger, intensity of that communication, mild versus severe, and technical, acoustic, ecological, supracompositional elements of rhythm, pitch, frequency, and resonance for the right interpreters, other animals, other fish, other plants, etc., communicate clear environmental cues to conspecifics and often intraspecifics also. The immediate sensation of particular sonic expressions impart many folds of meaning, accessible for those with the disposition to hear and feel them. It's too easy when modeling communication to privilege certain aspects and to ignore others, and this is what we're trying to avoid. So, language and music also overlaps in human communities. Just as we claim that the iconicity of non-human music provides a full palette of communicative needs without added semantic specificity, which is thought to be the privileged domain of language. Turning to human music, we can now look at how in strictly coded musical cultures, human music's symbolic repertoire can serve the purpose of language's semantic specificity. An example from human culture would be the Yoruba people. There's been a lot of anthropological interest in the use of talking drums for long-distance communication as speech surrogates, sometimes across or down rivers, and their roar, which vocal speech would encounter sonic interference from. While the syntactical and semantic use of drums is not a comprehensive picture of the use of the drums in Yoruba culture, it's easy to see why there's so much excitement. So let's see. Okay, so on the surface, this long-distance communication system uses elements of both language and music. Speakers of tonal languages like Yoruban use sequences of notes played on pitch drums in order to transmit information. Drumming in this case uses musicality as a sort of Morse code, embedding and encoding very specific representation calls and responses deliberately chosen to minimize miscommunication on matters of potentially great importance. Repetition is key when receivers doubt the precision of the original message. Despite their perlocutionary content, they do not lose their musicality, as one would expect, if some sort of zero-sum game of mutual exclusivity were at play. Indeed, the message contains both linguistic and musical elements, symbolic and musical elements, and in so doing constitutes a robust communication system. Symbolic and iconic content here serve to reinforce each other and convey the intended message more clearly than if one or the other communication techniques were used on their own. More recent scholarship extends Yoruban drumming to also pay attention to communication with the deities and spiritual practices for artistic purposes. Symbolic content, aesthetics, and emotion blend together in a palatable way. Another example, this time from India, looks at Indian classical music system of notation in Carnatic and Hindustani music, and the correspondence between words and musical sounds. Svara, or swara, in Sanskrit connotes a specific breath, vowel, and corresponding musical note. This ancient Indian concept of musical pitch is thoroughgoingly symbolic, so much so that melodies become words, and poetry can be expressed instrumentally. In a culture where music and language are intertwined, melodies can convey to seasoned listeners lines of poetry that can be back-translated from music into words, into the poetic words, similar to how the Yoruban drum calls carry precise semantic content of their language. So here's an example of that. So that's the lines of poetry up there that he's playing. This is a Tagore, a poem from Tagore, the great Indian poet. So it is a common assumption that language is informative and music is emotional. But this view is incomplete, as we know from Damasio and many others. It tends to underestimate the meaningful dimensions of musicality and emotion as having syntactic content in the right context. Music has different functions: performative, expressive, aesthetic, and not all music has all functions. Human music has different instantiations and purposes in different cultures, and exists in forms of communication and expression that might not necessarily be called music, although they involve acoustic and aesthetic choices. So finally, the felicity of utterances and Umwelten. If all forms of semiosis, including language and music, are utilitarian in non-singular ways, I'll say that again. If all forms of semiosis, including music and language, are utilitarian in non-singular ways, non-unimetric ways, meaning that the composite semiosis is greater than any particular digital or analog component, then it behooves us to stop ignoring certain aspects of semiosis as superfluous extras. Achieving higher fidelity, semiosis ecologically, biologically, and culturally requires tuning into a full spectrum approach rather than settling for certain narrow bandwidths, even if the latter do provide exquisite depth. Perhaps there could be a zero-sum game of awareness, but then at least we should check once in a while to see if the findings of our narrow focus correlate with the other extant forms that are sidelined in order to concentrate on specific details. Otherwise, we risk entering the Hall of Mirrors of ungrounded symbolic communication, which Terry Deacon, Ian McGilchrist, and others have identified and warned about. And may I? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Attending to the musicality of language and other alloorganism modes of semiosis not only helps overcome the digital centrism of 20th century positivist linguistics, but it also permits anchoring semiosis in joy and pleasure. As Cole, in his recent Target article on beauty, has written about, beauty is the perfect semiotic fitting. The joining of beauty with precision is crucial to overcoming prejudices against ecological harmony, as if attending to the needs, demands, pleas, and lives of others somehow reduced our own happiness or fitness. Multi-relational fitting with other aspects of one's Umwelt suggests that the aesthetic dimensions of speech, lost in much of contemporary speech in most cultures, provides far more in terms of entrainment towards comprehension and mood attunement than we might have previously assumed. In other words, attending to the musicality latent in much semiosis opens our aperture of awareness to wider ranges of factors and signals, both endo and exosemiotically, enabling us to more fully inhabit our bodies and places and orders that constitute us. By becoming more aware of the way in which musicality informs our own semiosis, we can attend more deliberately to the musical qualities in non-human biosemiotics. Paying attention to soundscapes as cohesive structures also temper cacophony and other intrusive forms of anthropophony. Attending to our influences, say on distorting birdsong or other aural forms of communication by our non-human cohabitants of a given territory, can also give motivation to walk back the loudness which has come to represent our age. Perhaps in a quieter world, our own musicality, using the whisper or sottovoce as ways of gathering and conveying our thoughts, may introduce new modes of thought that show our current linguistic paradigm to be but one frame of reference, always pointing beyond amongst others. Each frame of reference, each form of semiosis with its own insights that help us contextualize the rest. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Yogi. And now we'll have maybe time for one extremely short question. Maybe. But considering the time constraints. Okay, very short, please.
A beautiful example, Kalevi's doctrine. Not a word of differential reproduction. Fitness. This is the way to do it, right? Again, not to reduce semiosis to this utilitarian Darwinian fitness function, but to see semiosis in its place in the world. Beautiful presentation, really great.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you very much, Yogi.